A crystal wine glass exploded across the marble floor. Every conversation inside the grand wedding hall died in an instant. A heavily armed guard burst through the massive wooden doors, breathing so hard he could barely speak. "Boss, they're inside the estate. Somebody sold us out." Panic spread through the room like wildfire. Guests scrambled beneath tables. Women screamed. Several bodyguards reached beneath their jackets and pulled out pistols. Chairs crashed against the polished floor as dozens of men rushed toward the exits. Yet one man didn't move. Standing before the altar, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit that barely concealed the ink covering his neck and hands, Lorenzo Moretti remained completely still. Every inch of his body carried tattoos that told the story of blood, loyalty, and war. Black roses climbed from his wrists to his shoulders. Roman gladiators covered his chest beneath his shirt. A massive wolf stretched across the back of his neck, its eyes disappearing beneath his dark hair. He looked less like a groom and more like death itself. His icy eyes slowly turned toward the frightened guard. "Did I ask anyone to panic?" Lorenzo asked quietly. "No, boss." "Then why are you shouting in front of my wife?" Silence. The guard swallowed hard. "I'm sorry." Only then did Lorenzo shift his attention toward the woman standing beside him. The whispers started again. "Look at her. She can barely fit in that dress. I still don't understand why he married her. She's enormous. Poor Lorenzo. She's embarrassing." The insults floated through the hall as though the speakers believed she couldn't hear them. But she heard every single word. Giulia Romano kept her chin high. She was proudly Italian, born and raised in a quiet neighborhood outside Florence. She wasn't the type of woman magazines celebrated. She was very plus-size, beautifully curvy, undeniably chubby, with soft cheeks, warm brown eyes, and long dark curls resting over her shoulders. Her wedding gown had been custom-made because no designer in Milan had believed they could make something elegant in her size. Yet she looked beautiful, not because of the dress, because despite the cruelty surrounding her, she refused to let anyone steal her dignity. She slowly turned toward the crowd. "I hope all of you enjoyed your jokes," she said calmly, "because if laughter makes people feel stronger, then today must have made you all feel invincible." Several guests looked away. Others simply laughed louder. One wealthy woman smirked. "How brave." Another added, "Confidence doesn't change mirrors." Giulia smiled gently. "No," she answered, "but character changes lives." Lorenzo looked at her for several seconds. She hadn't cried. She hadn't run. She hadn't begged anyone to stop. Interesting. Outside, another burst of gunfire echoed through the estate. One of Lorenzo's captains rushed inside. "They've breached the east wall." Lorenzo finally moved. He kissed Giulia's forehead. "I'll be back." She grabbed his wrist. "No." Every eye widened. Nobody touched Lorenzo Moretti without permission. Yet she held his tattooed hand firmly. "If you run outside angry," she whispered, "you'll walk into exactly what they planned." One captain scoffed. "Stay out of this." Another laughed. What would she know about war? Giulia ignored them. She looked only at Lorenzo. "They want you emotional." He stared into her eyes. "Why would you think that?" "Because if someone betrayed you today, then they know how you think." The room fell silent. For a split second, Lorenzo hesitated. That alone shocked everyone. Before anyone could speak again, another guard entered. "They're retreating!" Confused voices spread through the hall. "They're leaving? It makes no sense." Lorenzo's eyes narrowed. "They weren't trying to kill me." Giulia nodded. "They were measuring your response." The room became silent again. One captain frowned. How could she possibly know that? Giulia answered before Lorenzo could. "Because people don't reveal their strength during the first attack." She paused. "They reveal your weakness." Lorenzo slowly smiled. It wasn't warm. It wasn't kind. It was the smile of a man who had just realized someone else saw the battlefield exactly as he did. If you've enjoyed the story so far, take a second to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let us know in the comments. What would you have done if you were standing in Giulia's place? Now, let's see what happened next. The ceremony somehow continued, not because anyone felt safe, because nobody dared tell Lorenzo Moretti his wedding was over. Minutes later, the vows were exchanged. No music, no celebration, no applause, only silence. When the officiant announced them husband and wife, the guests clapped politely, though most were still exchanging mocking glances. As Giulia and Lorenzo walked toward the reception hall, she noticed something. One waiter wasn't looking at the guests. He wasn't looking at the food. He kept watching Lorenzo's captains. Every few seconds, almost as if waiting for a signal. She leaned closer. That waiter. Lorenzo didn't turn his head. What about him? He doesn't belong here. One captain rolled his eyes. Here we go again. Giulia continued quietly. His shoes. What? They're military. The captain laughed. You identified him because of shoes? No. She looked again. The shoes and his watch. The waiter suddenly noticed her staring. His expression changed for half a second. Fear. Then he disappeared into the kitchen. Giulia frowned. He's leaving. The captain sighed dramatically. I'll check. 5 minutes later, he returned, breathing heavily. The kitchen door was open. And? Lorenzo asked. He's gone. The captain refused to meet Giulia's eyes. Lorenzo noticed. You searched? Yes. And? He left behind an earpiece. Another captain interrupted. It could belong to anyone. Giulia shook her head. No. She pointed toward the dining tables. Count the waiters. Someone counted. There are 19. The catering company sent 20. Everyone froze. Lorenzo turned toward Giulia. How did you know that? I counted when we arrived. You counted every waiter? I noticed details. One elderly guest whispered, maybe she's lucky. Another muttered, or maybe she's smarter than we thought. Lorenzo remained expressionless, but inside, something had shifted. Hours later, the celebration ended. Lorenzo's armored convoy drove through the winding roads leading toward his enormous estate, overlooking the Tuscan countryside. Inside the limousine, neither of them spoke. Finally, Lorenzo broke the silence. You embarrassed several powerful people today. Giulia looked out the window. No, I embarrassed their assumptions. He almost smiled again. You don't scare easily. I've spent my whole life being laughed at. She looked down at her wedding ring. When you've survived that, people pointing guns doesn't feel quite as frightening. Lorenzo studied her. Most people feared him before speaking. She simply talked, as if he were any other man. You knew people would insult you today. Yes. Why come? She answered immediately. Because I refused to let cowards decide whether I deserved happiness. The limousine became quiet again. Then Lorenzo asked something unexpected. Were you afraid of marrying me? She smiled softly. Terrified. You don't look terrified. I learned a long time ago. Courage isn't the absence of fear. She looked directly into his eyes. It's deciding fear won't make your decisions. For the first time in years, Lorenzo looked away first. When they finally reached the estate, dozens of armed guards surrounded the property. Searchlights swept across the grounds. The attack had changed everything. Every captain gathered inside Lorenzo's private office. Maps covered the walls. Weapons rested on polished tables. Giulia quietly followed behind. One captain blocked her path. This meeting is for family, she answered calmly. I am family, he laughed. Not in this world. Before Giulia could reply, Lorenzo spoke without raising his voice. She stays. The captain immediately stepped aside. Inside the room, arguments erupted. We strike tonight. No. We wait. We hunt every suspected traitor. We lock down the ports. Everyone shouted over one another. Giulia listened. Nobody listened to anyone else. She slowly walked toward the enormous map on the wall. Her eyes stopped on 3 red pins marking warehouses. Then she asked one simple question. Why are these 3 locations marked differently? The room fell silent. One captain answered impatiently. They're our most secure warehouses. Giulia looked at him. If they're the most secure, why were they attacked first? No one had an answer. Lorenzo stared at the map, then back at Giulia. For the second time that day, she had asked a question none of his seasoned captains had considered. And somewhere in the shadows beyond the estate walls, the person who had betrayed Lorenzo Moretti smiled, believing the first move of a deadly game had gone exactly according to plan. They had no idea that the woman they had mocked all day had already begun seeing patterns no one else could see. Morning arrived with an uneasy silence that settled over the Moretti estate like a storm waiting for permission to break. Not a single captain had slept, neither had Lorenzo. The heavily tattooed Mafia boss stood on the balcony outside his office, staring across the rolling hills of Tuscany. His hands rested on the cold stone railing while 2 trusted guards stood several feet behind him. You think one of my captains betrayed me, he said without turning. I think someone wants you to believe the betrayal is already over. Giulia's voice came from behind him. He glanced over his shoulder. She was carrying 2 cups of espresso. I didn't ask for coffee. I know. She held 1 cup toward him anyway. But you needed it. He accepted it without another word. After a long sip, he asked quietly, Why are you helping me? She looked out across the countryside. My grandmother used to tell me something. And when good people walk away from danger, bad people stop hiding. Lorenzo watched her carefully. You loved her. She was my whole world. So why agree to marry someone like me? Giulia let out a slow breath. I didn't marry your reputation. She looked directly into his eyes. I married the man who kept his promise to an old woman. For the first time in many years. Those words struck Lorenzo harder than a bullet. No one had spoken to him like that in decades. Before either of them could continue, shouting erupted downstairs. A guard burst into the office. Boss. Lorenzo immediately turned. What happened? We found one of the accountants. And he's dead. The room fell silent. Minutes later, the entire family gathered inside a warehouse on the edge of the estate. The accountant's body lay on the concrete floor. There wasn't much blood. Just a single clean gunshot wound. One captain cursed. They're cleaning up loose ends. Another slammed his fist against a crate. We're running out of time. Giulia slowly walked around the body. Nobody stopped her. Not anymore. She crouched beside the dead man. His expensive watch was missing. His wallet remained untouched. His wedding ring was still on his finger. She frowned. Lorenzo noticed. What is it? This wasn't robbery. We already know that. She shook her head. No. She pointed toward the man's sleeve. The killer searched only one pocket. A captain crossed his arms. So? So he wasn't looking for money. What then? Paper. The captain frowned. Why would paper matter? Giulia stood. Because paper leaves evidence. Lorenzo nodded slowly. Continue. The killer knew exactly what he wanted. She looked around the warehouse. He didn't panic. He didn't rush. He came for one document. One captain scoffed. You're making guesses. Giulia calmly faced him. No, I'm following behavior. Before the captain could respond, Lorenzo interrupted. Search every office, every drawer, every safe. Find out what's missing. The captain scattered. Only Giulia remained. Lorenzo studied her. You've done this before. She hesitated. I used to investigate financial crimes. You told me you worked as an accountant. I was. She smiled faintly. But numbers tell stories. What kind of stories? She answered quietly. The kind people kill to hide. Hours passed. Every office inside the estate was turned upside down. Then one captain came running. We found it. Everyone gathered. The accountant's filing cabinet. What about it? One folder is missing. Lorenzo looked toward Giulia. She simply nodded. I told you. The captain opened the cabinet. Every file remained, except one. The label read, Port Deliveries. Another captain cursed loudly. Our shipping routes. Giulia closed her eyes. No. What? They don't want the routes. They already know them. Lorenzo frowned. What are they after? She looked at him. They want to know who changed them. Silence. Every captain stared. One finally whispered, Mother of God. Lorenzo immediately ordered, Bring me every shipment from the last 6 months. If you're enjoying the twist so far, don't forget to subscribe, like this video, and tell us in the comments who you think the real traitor is. Trust us, the biggest surprise is still ahead. Boxes filled with documents soon covered Lorenzo's office. The captains looked exhausted. Giulia rolled up the sleeves of her blouse. Let's begin. One captain laughed. There are thousands of pages. She smiled. Good. He blinked. Good? The bigger the pile, the easier it is to hide something. She began reading, invoice after invoice, shipment after shipment. Hours turned into evening. Everyone else became frustrated. Giulia became calmer. Then, she stopped. This signature. Lorenzo looked over. What about it? It changes. A captain leaned closer. So? She placed 2 papers side by side. The same man signed both. Everyone nodded. Yes. But look closely. Nobody understood. She pointed. On Mondays, he writes the letter M differently. The room became quiet. Lorenzo narrowed his eyes. And these signatures weren't written by the same person. One captain laughed loudly. You're saying someone copied handwriting? Giulia answered poorly. The laughter stopped. Lorenzo immediately ordered, Find the man whose name is on those papers. Another hour later, a frightened shipping manager was dragged into the office. He looked terrified. I swear I didn't do anything. Lorenzo remained seated. Sit. The man obeyed immediately. Lorenzo placed both invoices in front of him. Did you sign these? The manager looked. His face turned pale. I signed this one. He pointed. But, he looked again. I didn't sign the other. Lorenzo leaned forward. Who did? I don't know. You have 5 seconds. I don't know. Lorenzo's expression hardened. 3. I swear. 2. The man burst into tears. It was Marco. The room froze. Marco. Lorenzo's logistics chief. A man who had worked beside him for 11 years. One captain immediately shouted, Impossible. Another slammed his hand against the table. Marco is loyal. Giulia quietly asked, Where is Marco now? Silence. One captain slowly answered, He hasn't checked in since yesterday. The office became deadly quiet. Lorenzo stood. Find him. Every vehicle belonging to the Moretti family roared out of the estate. For 6 hours. Nothing. No Marco. No phone signal. No witnesses. Then, shortly after midnight, one guard radioed in. Boss. What? We found his car. And Marco? The hesitation lasted only seconds. He wasn't inside. Instead, there was a message, painted across the driver's door in fresh red letters. You trust the wrong people. Back at the estate, panic spread faster than ever. Several captains demanded immediate retaliation. They're mocking us. We attack tonight. We burn every warehouse they own. Lorenzo listened, then turned toward Giulia. What do you think? Every captain looked offended. Boss, you're asking her? Lorenzo never took his eyes off Giulia. She stared at the photograph of Marco's abandoned car. Finally, she spoke. If you attack tonight, you lose. The room erupted. Ridiculous. They're afraid. This is weakness. Giulia raised her voice for the first time. No. The room fell silent. She pointed at the photograph. They abandoned that car where you were guaranteed to find it. So, they wanted you angry. One captain argued. We are angry. I know. Exactly. She looked at Lorenzo. They've spent 2 days trying to make you react. And, so don't. The room fell into another tense silence. Lorenzo folded his arms. What would you do instead? Giulia stepped closer to the wall map. She studied every warehouse, every port, every marked route. Then she quietly said something that sent a chill through everyone in the room. I don't think Marco is the traitor. Several captains gasped. What? He confessed. No. Giulia shook her head. He was blamed. Lorenzo's eyes narrowed. Explain. She pointed to the forged signatures. Someone wanted us to find these. She pointed to the missing file. Someone wanted us chasing shipping records. Then she pointed to the message on the abandoned car. And someone wanted Marco to disappear. She slowly turned back toward Lorenzo. The real traitor is still standing close enough to watch every decision you make. No one spoke, not even Lorenzo, because deep down, he knew she was right. And somewhere inside the estate itself, hidden behind loyal smiles and respectful bows, the true enemy listened and realized that Giulia Romano had become far more dangerous than anyone had ever imagined. Lorenzo didn't speak. He slowly looked around the room. Every captain who had fought beside him for years suddenly looked different. Every handshake, every promise, every oath of loyalty. Now they all carried a shadow. You all heard my wife, Lorenzo said quietly. The word wife echoed through the office. It was the first time he had spoken it with genuine conviction. The traitor is still among us. One captain slammed his fist onto the table. This is madness. Another shook his head. We're turning against our own family. Lorenzo's tattooed fingers rested calmly on the edge of the table. No, his cold eyes swept across the room. We're finding the one who already turned against us. Nobody argued. Not with that voice. Giulia watched every face instead of the map. One captain looked angry. Another looked confused. A third looked frightened. But one man barely reacted at all. His name was Vittorio Bianchi, Lorenzo's oldest advisor, nearly 15 years beside him. Silver hair, expensive suits, perfect manners. He simply folded his hands. Boss, Vittorio said softly, perhaps we're allowing emotions to cloud judgment. Giulia didn't answer. She simply remembered something. At the wedding, when everyone laughed, Vittorio hadn't laughed. He had watched, studied, measured, almost as if he already knew something no one else did. Lorenzo looked toward him. You disagree? I think we're chasing ghosts. Giulia finally spoke. No. Everyone turned. We're chasing someone who wants us chasing ghosts. Vittorio smiled politely. A bold statement. It isn't. She stepped closer. It's an observation. Vittorio raised an eyebrow. And what exactly have you observed? You've spoken only when everyone else stopped talking. Silence. You never suggested attacking. You never suggested defending. You only suggested waiting. Vittorio chuckled. Is patience now suspicious? No. Giulia smiled back. But control is. The room became tense. Lorenzo watched them carefully. Giulia continued. Every conversation somehow ends exactly where you want it to. Vittorio slowly clapped. Impressive. You notice patterns. I do. But patterns aren't proof. I know. She nodded. They're invitations. Vittorio leaned back. Invitations to what? to make mistakes. Nobody breathed. Lorenzo finally spoke. Enough. He looked around the room. Nobody leaves the estate. Several captains immediately objected. Boss, I said. His voice dropped lower. Nobody leaves. The meeting ended, but the tension didn't. Throughout the estate, armed guards doubled their patrols. Phones were confiscated. Vehicles were searched. Every employee was questioned. Hours passed. Nothing. Not a single clue. Late that evening, Giulia wandered into one of the estate's smaller kitchens. She couldn't sleep. Stress always made her hungry. She quietly opened a cupboard. Looking for something? She turned. It was Lorenzo, holding 2 plates. I couldn't sleep either, he admitted. She smiled. I wasn't expecting the feared Lorenzo Moretti to raid his own kitchen. I wasn't expecting my wife to do the same. For the first time, they both laughed. Only for a second. Then Lorenzo became serious. You've changed this house. I've been here 2 days. You've changed me. She looked surprised. I've spent years believing fear earned loyalty. He stared at the untouched espresso machine. You made me realize loyalty and fear aren't the same. Giulia answered gently. My grandmother used to say, people obey fear. She paused. But they protect love. Lorenzo lowered his eyes. No one's ever tried to teach me that. You were surrounded by soldiers. She smiled softly. Not family. A loud explosion shattered the moment. Boom! The entire mansion shook. Alarms screamed. Guards rushed through the hallways. Boss! The West Garage! Lorenzo and Giulia ran outside. Several luxury cars burned in flames. Smoke filled the night. One guard shouted, "It was timed!" Another yelled, "No casualties!" Lorenzo looked around. This wasn't meant to kill. Giulia immediately answered, "It was meant to distract." She turned toward the mansion. "Your office." Without another word, Lorenzo sprinted inside. His captains followed. When they reached the office, the safe stood open. Nothing appeared missing. One captain sighed. They failed. Giulia slowly walked closer. No, she stared inside the safe. They succeeded. Lorenzo frowned. What do you mean? She pointed. The documents are untouched. So? The safe wasn't opened to steal. She looked around the room. It was opened to plant something. Everyone froze. The bomb squad carefully searched the office. Inside the false bottom of the safe, they found a tiny encrypted tracking device. Silence. One captain whispered, "They've been tracking every file we move." Giulia nodded. Which means they always knew where Lorenzo's investigations were going. Lorenzo turned slowly. His expression became ice cold. Only 5 people knew the safe code. Every captain looked at one another. Then, Vittorio quietly cleared his throat. "Boss." Everyone turned. "I think it's time I told you something." The room stiffened. "What?" Vittorio reached into his jacket. Several guards immediately aimed their weapons. Instead of a gun, he removed an old photograph. He placed it on the table. Lorenzo picked it up. His face changed. It showed Lorenzo's father, standing beside Vittorio, and another man. A man Lorenzo hadn't seen since childhood. "My uncle." Vittorio nodded. "Your uncle never died." Silence crashed over the room. "What? He's alive." Lorenzo's voice hardened. "You're lying." "I'm not." "Why tell me now?" "Because," Vittorio sighed, "he's the one behind all this." One captain shouted, "Convenient timing." Another added, "We can't trust him." Giulia didn't look at the photograph. She looked at Vittorio. His hands were shaking, not with fear, with guilt. She stepped closer. "You've been hiding something for years." He closed his eyes. "Yes. You thought keeping the secret protected Lorenzo." "Yes. But silence protected the enemy instead." A tear rolled down the old advisor's face. "Yes. Lorenzo's breathing became heavier. You knew, all these years, I made a promise to your father. What promise? To keep you alive. And lying was part of that. I believed it was. Lorenzo slammed the photograph onto the table. You believed wrong. Before anyone could react, a young guard rushed into the office. Boss, what now? We intercepted a transmission. From who? The guard swallowed. We traced it. Where? The answer stunned everyone. It came from inside the estate. Every weapon in the room rose instantly. Nobody trusted anyone anymore. The silence became unbearable. Giulia slowly reached for Lorenzo's hand. He didn't pull away. She squeezed it gently, then whispered, "They're trying to make you doubt everyone." He looked at her. "What if I already do?" She answered without hesitation. "Then start with the people who have never asked you to fear them." Their eyes met. For the first time since the wedding, Lorenzo realized the only person in the entire estate who had never wanted anything from him was the woman everyone had mocked for her appearance. She had asked for no money, no power, no influence, only honesty, and somehow that made her the strongest person in the room. Just then, another encrypted message arrived on Lorenzo's secure phone. There were only 8 words. Your wife sees too much. She dies next. Lorenzo's face turned to stone. He slowly locked the phone, then looked at every captain in the room. If anyone wants Giulia, his voice was calm, deadly calm. They'll have to walk through me first. Outside, hidden in the darkness beyond the estate walls, a lone figure watched the mansion through a rifle scope, smiled, and whispered, "Let's see how long love survives a mafia war." If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe for more emotional mafia dramas, and share this story with someone who loves unexpected twists. Most importantly, tell us in the comments, who do you think is the real mastermind? And would you trust Vittorio after his confession? Your theories might inspire the next story.